U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said that Hong Kong is no longer autonomous under China. The declaration has huge implications for the U.S. and China. This came before China's Thursday vote on a controversial law on Hong Kong. On top of recent U.S. sanctions, China's Huawei suffered another major blow. A Canadian court ruled its senior executive could be extradited to the U.S. China's space ambition suffered another blow as a launched rocket had trouble returning to Earth and crashed into the ocean. Wuhan's plan to test all 11 million residents in 10 days raised some concerns. Many are wondering about the accuracy rate. So what are the results? And China ruled out Wuhan CCP virus ground zero market. The latest turnaround deepens the mystery surrounding the coronavirus origins. Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo declared today that Hong Kong is no longer autonomous. The announcement comes hours before Beijing is to vote on a controversial new security law for the city, a law that has huge implications for both China and the U.S.
The U.S. says Hong Kong's autonomy is gone. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said in a statement on Wednesday, Hong Kong does not continue to warrant treatment under United States laws, and no reasonable person can assert today that Hong Kong maintains a high degree of autonomy from China, given facts on the ground. Sources told Reuters the Trump administration is considering suspending Hong Kong's preferential tariff rates for exports to the U.S. Revoking Hong Kong's special status has huge implications. Hong Kong is China's window to the world's investments. It accounts for 2/3 of China's overall foreign investment inflows. China affairs commentator Tang Jingyuan says the change of status will harm China's economy substantially.
Once Hong Kong's special status is lost, the economic gateway for mainland China to attract investment will basically be shut down. Mainland China might go back to the days when it cut off all relationships with the outside world, the days before its reform and openness in the 80s.
China promised Hong Kong autonomy and freedoms under the Sino-British Joint Declaration, a UN-filed international treaty. However, the new law Beijing's pushing will bypass Hong Kong's legislature and be directly implemented in Hong Kong, which Hong Kong lawmakers say is a blatant violation of China's promise.
This will be a heavy strike on the credibility of China as a country. Investors from the world will realize that the Chinese Communist Party is a regime that can disobey any agreement and does not care about trust. If I'm going to invest there is no protection for my investment. Even for an agreement like this, the CCP can just breach it at its will without caring about the consequences. Then it's totally possible for the regime to turn its back on any contracts or agreements it signed with a small foreign business.
Revoking Hong Kong's special status will also affect U.S. businesses. The U.S. and Hong Kong trade $67 billion worth of goods and services each year. More than 1,300 U.S. companies operate in Hong Kong, and over 85,000 U.S. citizens live there. Tang says in a political sense, Hong Kong is the Berlin of this era. Its basic law is the wall providing the protection from which the world's capital connects with China. But with the new law Beijing is pushing in Hong Kong, the CCP is passing over the wall and launching a strike against the liberal democratic society.
Right now, the U.S. does not seem to have a choice where it can unilaterally strike the Chinese Communist Party without hurting itself a little. There is no such choice. The CCP has struck the first blow. It has put the U.S. in a position where it does not have a choice. The U.S. either fights against it or makes a compromise with the CCP.
Losing the special status will speed up Hong Kong's decline as a financial and economic center. But that's the result many Hong Kong protesters are pushing for. They call the tactic against the CCP Lan Chao, or in English, if we burn, you burn with us. With little leverage in hand, protesters want Chinese authorities to pay a price and feel the pain if they dare to take away Hong Kong's freedom. Pompeo said this decision gives him no pleasure, adding that the United States stands with the people of Hong Kong. Reporting by Penny Zhou, NTD News.
Police in Hong Kong fired pepper pellets and made over 300 arrests on Wednesday as thousands of people took to the streets. They're protesting so-called national security legislation the Chinese regime is pushing that many fear will strip Hong Kong of its rightful freedoms and rule of law.
People of all ages took to the streets, some dressed in black, some in office clothes, and some concealing their identities with umbrellas. Members from the Hong Kong Association for Democracy and People's Livelihood chanted slogans against the legislation.
But after returning to China for more than 20 years, we didn't have any progress in this stage. But alternatively, we can see the CCP is trying to suppress Hong Kong people in a more serious manner. So we're trying to safeguard our human rights.
Police fired pepper pellets to disperse protesters. It comes as the Legislative Council is debating another controversial bill from Beijing. Hong Kong pro-democracy activist Joshua Wong says Beijing is taking advantage of the pandemic to push through its national security law.
In the previous day, we might be arrested, prosecuted, and jailed in Hong Kong. But once the national security law passed, secret police from Beijing could arrest me to mainland China, and I might be jailed in Beijing instead of Hong Kong in the future. So I think now is the time for the world to stand with Hong Kong.
Hong Kong resident Mary, who comes from mainland China, expressed her worries at the scene.
I came to Hong Kong from mainland China when I was young, and that's why I know the darkness of China. And I'm worried China will impose its values and system on Hong Kong.
By 6 p.m. local time, about 300 people across the city were arrested, aged from 14 to 40. The Hong Kong Journalists Association soon issued a statement condemning the police's behavior, including forcing reporters to stop their live streaming, preventing journalists from carrying out their jobs, and firing pepper ball rounds directly at a reporter. And in the adjacent area, police fired pepper spray at protesters and stopped people for interrogation. A reporter from NTD's sister media, the Epoch Times, was also hit by pepper spray while covering protests in the area.
The Chinese Communist Party is expected to pass its national security law tomorrow. A Canadian judge has ruled that the Huawei executive under house arrest in Vancouver could be extradited to the United States. On top of crippling sanctions from the U.S., it's another blow to the Chinese tech conglomerate. NTD's Juliet Song reports.
A top Huawei executive is one step closer to being extradited to the United States. A Canadian judge ruled that Meng Wanzhou's case meets the legal standard for extradition, meaning that the U.S. charges against Meng are also crimes in Canada. In 2018, Canada arrested Meng at the request of the United States. Meng is Huawei's chief financial officer. She's also the daughter of the company's founder. The U.S. charged Meng with bank fraud and violating U.S. sanctions on Iran. Meng says she's innocent. NTD obtained group chat messages between former Huawei employees. One said he can prove that Huawei was selling sanctioned goods to Iran. The employee was later arrested by Chinese police. Huawei is a Chinese telecommunications giant with close ties to the communist regime. Washington says the company spies for China. The U.S. has repeatedly accused Huawei of stealing technological and trade secrets. It also says Huawei poses national security risks and warns allies to not use Huawei's 5G technology. The ruling is another setback for Huawei, which is already facing harsh difficulties. Huawei is the world's second largest smartphone maker, and over 90% of its smartphone chips come from a Taiwanese manufacturing company. But the company may no longer be able to sell to Huawei under a new U.S. rule. And it's nearly impossible for Huawei to find a supplier to replace them. Right after Meng was arrested, China responded by detaining 2 Canadian nationals and restricting various Canadian exports. The 2 Canadian citizens are still in jail in China. China has been pressing for Meng's release and warned of harm to Canada's relations with China. Meng's defense team will be back in court this June for the second phase of her extradition hearing. Extradition from Canada to the U.S. could take years. If Meng can't avoid extradition, she could still appeal to Canada's Supreme Court, and Canada's Justice Minister will make the final decision on whether to turn her over. Reporting by Juliet Song, NTD News.
Wuhan has almost completed its initiative to test every one of its residents. According to Chinese state media, over 9 million samples were collected, and over 6.5 million of them were tested within 9 days. The result, no confirmed cases. One netizen wrote, "The test kits only have a 20% accuracy rate, and the whole initiative was called off before everybody was tested. Are they covering something up? Only fools believe everything is okay." Another netizen wrote, "If the Chinese Communist Party says there are no cases, then there are no cases." According to China's Caixin Weekly, in April, Wuhan conducted an antibody test on 11,000 people, and 5 to 6% tested positive. These people are or have been infected with the virus. By that logic, at least 500,000 of Wuhan's 11 million people are or have been infected. The Caixin report was deleted shortly after publishing. Every year since 1990, Hong Kongers have held a parade to remember the Tiananmen massacre, but this year it won't be possible. A Hong Kong human rights group applied to hold the Don't Forget June 4th parade on May 31st, but was rejected by the police. Hong Kong authorities say large gatherings are dangerous during the pandemic. The group says it's unfair since business and schools have all restarted, but all parades and rallies have been blocked. It's the first year this parade has been rejected. The police will allow rallies again after June 4th. The group is trying to hold a candlelight rally in a park on that day. If police don't allow it, they have a plan B. They'll organize Hong Kongers to light candles at 8 p.m. on that day, wherever they are, and observe 1 minute of silence online. Taiwanese President Tsai Ing-wen was sworn in for a second term on May 20th. The Chinese embassy in Brazil sent a letter to a member of the Brazilian parliament, Paulo Eduardo Martins. It asked the parliament to avoid gestures that could harm the One China principle. Martins tweeted, "The embassy of the Chinese dictatorship advised Brazilian parliamentarians to stay silent on the inauguration of the Taiwanese president. What an insult." It says, "We can't even congratulate the president. So even though I'm late, I congratulate President Tsai Ing-wen on her inauguration." Many Twitter users responded and congratulated Taiwanese President too. Viva Taiwan was even trending for a while in Brazil. On May 26, the Taiwanese president tweeted her gratitude to Brazil. China claims the island Taiwan as a province. As a democratic system, Taiwan never accepted being ruled by the Communist Party. U.S.-based China affairs analyst Lan Shu believes people are supporting freedom and democracy when they support the Viva Taiwan movement. And it is foolish for the CCP to tell Brazilian elected parliamentarians what to do.
The CCP rules by lies, violence, and tyranny. Taiwanese people live under the shadow of China's bullying every day. It has a very clear understanding of the CCP's nature. So Taiwan knows the CCP better than any other country in the world.
Israel yesterday chose a winning bidder for the country's largest water treatment plant. 7 companies were bidding for it, including China's Hutchinson. Israel passed over China's bid, choosing local IDE technologies instead. This comes after U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo's visit earlier this month. He warned Israel against Chinese participation in the country's projects. Pompeo didn't explicitly mention the treatment plant. Countries are racing to develop rapid virus tests as they start to reopen. Mammoth Biosciences in California announced a partnership with GSK Consumer Healthcare to produce a fully disposable handheld test. It would only need a simple nasal swab to test a person. GSK plans to have the FDA evaluate the device before the end of the year. According to the COVID tracking project, the U.S. is now conducting at least 300,000 tests daily since May 11th. And an Irish company has released a new rapid test kit. The new test by Hybrid Gene Diagnostics gives a positive result in 30 minutes and a negative one in 60 minutes. In a statement, the company said the product has met all clinical evaluation study requirements and is ready for sale in Ireland and abroad. China's growing ambitions in space suffered a new setback, and it could be thanks to the U.S.-China trade war.
China's space program encountered its latest setback in early May, and one expert says it might be the result of US sanctions. On May 5th, Chinese officials announced the successful launch of their largest carrier rocket, the Long March 5B, from the southern province of Hainan. One day later, state-run media Xinhua said the rocket's core ran into a problem while returning to Earth. The Defense Department confirmed on May 11th the rocket fell out of the sky, re-entering the atmosphere uncontrolled over the Atlantic Ocean. This is the most recent blow to China's space ambitions this year. In early April, a rocket carrying an Indonesian satellite failed to reach orbit, and in mid-March, another rocket encountered an abnormality minutes after liftoff. China is trying to catch up with the US and Russia to become a major space power by 2030. A military expert from a Taiwanese think tank told Radio Free Asia last month that China's rocket technology depends heavily on microchips imported from the US. He says the export restrictions that are part of the US-China trade war impeded China's military technology development, which resulted in the high failure rate. Chinese state-run Global Times later responded, saying China's rocket control systems have, quote, mastered complete localization for a long time. Last year, federal authorities arrested a Chinese national trying to bypass US restriction to obtain a special type of microchip often used in space missions.
Chinese officials appear to be shifting their rhetoric about the origin of the CCP virus. The Hunan seafood market was once thought to be the birthplace of the virus, but now the CCP is painting it as a victim.
China's CDC Director George Gao said on Monday in an interview with local Chinese media, no CCP virus had been detected in animal samples collected from the wet market in Wuhan. Gao said he had gone to Wuhan to collect samples for research in early January and found the virus locally in sewage, but not in animals at the market.
We didn't find the novel coronavirus in these animals. It's the sewage. The virus was found in some sewers.
However, Chinese officials initially seemed to home in on the origin of the virus. On January 22nd, Gao told the press at a conference held by China's State Council that the CCP virus came from a wild animal illegally sold in a seafood market in Wuhan. Gao didn't mention any virus that came from sewage samples.
Its source comes from contact with the wild animals sold at the seafood market.
The next day on the evening news, Gao pinpointed the source of the virus as wild animals in the market.
After the outbreak, the source was quickly found in the Hunan seafood market. The virus was found in the stalls where wild animals were sold illegally. The evidence is certain.
A few months later, Gao overthrew his previous statement.
In the beginning, we presumed the market might have the virus, but now it turns out that the market is one of the victims. The novel coronavirus had existed long before.
Large-scale disinfection measures took place on and off in the Huanan seafood market as early as January 1st. Health experts say finding the source is key to preventing further reinfection of the virus and potentially unleashing another wave of disease. While Chinese officials increasingly question whether the virus originated in China and repeatedly rejected offers of international involvement to help search. On May 18th, China agreed to a WHO-led post-pandemic review that would stop short of examining the origin of the outbreak.
YouTube admits to deleting phrases critical of the Chinese Communist Party. Amid the controversy, a senator is also demanding answers from Google about its censorship.
YouTube is deleting comments with Chinese phrases critical of the Chinese Communist Party like Communist Bandit and 50-Cent Army. The Google-owned company admitted this to our sister media, the Epoch Times, but it blamed the censorship on an error in their enforcement systems, which they say they're working to fix. We caught the deleting in real time with a few phrases. Communist Bandit with a period in between, 50-Cent Army, the name of Chinese internet trolls who work for the CCP, and 70-Cent Army, the name they got after a supposed pay raise. All were deleted except for 80-Cent Army, a phrase the reporter made up. Senator Josh Hawley is also demanding answers from Google CEO Sundar Pichai. Hawley said in his letter to the CEO that kowtowing is unacceptable. Selling out American principles to curry favor with communist officials is no way to run an American business, regardless of who else is doing it. He's asking Pichai to explain why these terms were censored, to identify the results of any internal investigation into the censorship, and to explain what Google will do to ensure that the CCP doesn't manipulate their algorithms. Miguel Moreno, NTD News.
The UK's media regulator says China's state television channel has breached British broadcasting rules. It's thanks to what it calls the network's biased coverage of the Hong Kong pro-democracy protests. Our UK correspondent Jane Werrell has the story.
China Global Television Network, a media mouthpiece for the Chinese communist regime, could lose its license in the UK. An investigation by Ofcom, the UK's media regulator, found that the Chinese network broke UK broadcasting rules of impartiality on 5 occasions in its coverage of the Hong Kong protests in 2019. It found a serious failure of compliance. Ofcom said the programmes presented a one-sided perspective on the violence, giving the impression that protesters were solely responsible for the violence and disruption. The regulator said they are inclined to penalise the broadcaster. That could involve revoking its licence or issuing a fine. Ofcom stripped the licence of Press TV, the mouthpiece of the Iranian regime, in 2012 after a series of breaches. Ofcom is investigating 3 more complaints against the Chinese network. Among them the case of British citizen Peter Humphrey, who said he was drugged, locked in a cage and forced to read papers prepared by the police for a televised confession. The broadcaster's outlet in the US registered as a foreign agent in 2019 under orders from the US Justice Department. Jane Werrell, NTD News, London.
GOP lawmakers want to change the government's approach to providing relief from the economic impact of the virus. They say it's time to improve the financial aid packages that are already in place.
In the face of huge economic debt, Republican lawmakers do not wish to support the latest House-passed HEROES Act. Nearly $1 trillion under the act would go to local and state governments. But many Republicans in Washington say that this is using virus relief money to tackle issues that existed before the pandemic. Other measures included under the HEROES Act are not related to the pandemic at all, such as increasing vote by mail, funding Planned Parenthood, and bailing out the United States Postal Service. The White House economic advisor Larry Kudlow, speaking to Fox News Tuesday, said the $600 per week addition to unemployment benefits would likely be replaced or reformed after it expires on July 31st. He said a back-to-back work bonus put forward by Senator Rob Portman was a good idea instead. The bonus works as an incentive to encourage people to go back to work, rather than paying them to stay out of work. Employees would receive a $450 weekly bonus for a period of time if they go back on the job. This would also benefit small businesses looking to reopen and needing to hire more staff. The House is voting Wednesday on 2 important adjustments to existing aid packages affecting small businesses. One allows for reforms to the Paycheck Protection Program, such as relaxing restrictions on the forgiveness period and term of the loan. The other requires the Small Business Administration to disclose details about where small business relief money is going.
New Jersey's governor is one of the latest facing a lawsuit over regulations meant to slow the spread of the virus. 4 churches say his restrictions unfairly discriminate against them. NTD's Melina Weisskopf spoke to the lawyer spearheading the case.
4 churches in New Jersey are taking Governor Phil Murphy to court over what they say violates basic rights. Ron Coleman, the lawyer representing them, says the case is about more than just reopening churches.
And in my view, it's important for everyone, including people who don't go to church and may never go to church. These are fundamental rights. The lawsuit is premised not only on religious liberty, but also on free speech and the right of reassembly.
He says a large part of the argument is based on the governor's regulations on gatherings, which in his words don't make any sense. He's referring to the governor's rule that bans more than 10 people from gathering indoors, even in large buildings where people can still social distance. Coleman says the problem is that some places are exceptions to this rule, but churches aren't included. That means that while places like convenience stores, hardware stores, and liquor stores can have more than 10 people indoors, churches cannot.
But when you have a list, that shifts the burden to the state to demonstrate what was the reason for putting these things on the list and not other things on the list.
He points to a similar situation in Nevada. On Wednesday, the U.S. Assistant Attorney General wrote a letter to Nevada's governor, saying this particular gathering restriction treats religious and non-religious organizations unequally by limiting churches to 10 people, even if the churches show that they can follow social distancing. New Jersey District Court will hear the case on June 4th. Melina Weisskopf, NTD News.
Coleman says he hopes the Department of Justice will also look into New Jersey's situation. California has released new guidelines to allow houses of worship to open sooner than planned after the state was criticized. But the rules are so strict that some churches will remain closed.
California has announced new guidelines to allow houses of worship to reopen while minimizing the spread of the CCP virus. Most have been limited to online and remote services since March because of the state's stay-at-home order.
So in a pandemic, the blessing of having technology to allow us to continue to have some semblance of connection and relational interaction is the best we can do.
But as churches begin to reopen, some church leaders think the new guidelines are too strict.
It's going to be a tremendous difference than what we are used to, because we gather together, we like to hug, we like to shake hands, and we like to embrace one another. I mean, that's all about showing the love of God with one another.
The new guidelines require masks, social distancing, and frequent cleanings. Jackson believes it will permanently change the church experience. He's delaying his church's opening until late June.
The way we come back together will not be the same way that we left. We will have to have a new paradigm with church, coming to church, having services.
The rules also limit attendance to 100 people and recommend that worshipers limit singing as well as refrain from shaking hands and sharing prayer books.
We have been very aggressive in trying to put together guidelines that will do justice to people's health and their fundamental need and desire to practice their faith.
Newsom was warned by the Justice Department because he wasn't going to let churches open sooner. More than 1,200 California pastors were planning to defy the governor next Sunday and restart worship services despite the previous restrictions.
Uber and Lyft drivers are suing New York State for unemployment benefits they haven't received.
A federal lawsuit alleges that New York State has refused to pay or has delayed paying unemployment benefits for 2 months. The complaint alleges that when rideshare drivers submitted their information, they were told they would be awarded $0 in benefits. Uber and Lyft drivers have been challenged as to whether they are employees or independent contractors under New York law. The rideshare companies have been criticized for failing to hand over earnings and eligibility information to the Department of Labor. A spokesperson for New York's Labor Department said app-based workers are receiving unemployment benefits, but wouldn't specify how many drivers had received funds through pandemic unemployment assistance.
A UN organization predicts 70% less tourism. Ford installs self-disinfecting technology in police vehicles, and more. Here are today's business briefs.
The UN predicts global tourism could plunge 70% this year compared to last due to the CCP virus pandemic. Previous global crises caused 10 to 20% drops in tourism, but the United Nations World Tourism Organization says it's a lot worse this time. The virus pandemic has closed off borders around the world. The organization expects more international flights to resume starting in September if the virus is better under control. The ongoing spread of the CCP virus has made disinfecting law enforcement vehicles a major issue. So Ford implemented a new tool to neutralize the virus inside police cars. It's a software enhancement that raises the car's interior temperature to at least 133 degrees Fahrenheit for 15 minutes. Ford says that's hot enough and long enough to kill more than 99% of disease-causing germs. Ford tested the software on police vehicles in multiple states. It's now available on all 2013 to 19 Ford Police Interceptor vehicles. AT&T's Warner Media division is launching its HBO Max streaming service. The company is taking on Netflix, Disney, and Amazon at a time when lockdowns have boosted demand for streaming. The lockdown situation helped Netflix sign up 15.8 million new paying customers in the first 3 months of the year. At $15 per month, HBO Max is more expensive than both Disney Plus and the standard Netflix plan. Still, Warner Media hopes to have about 80 million global subscribers by 2025.
Here at China in Focus, we dedicate ourselves to bringing you truthful, unbiased reporting. Don't forget to like and subscribe for the latest updates, and see you tomorrow.